Hi everybody. Today we're moving on to sections 5.5 and 5.6, finding zeros of polynomials. So today we get to have a little fun in putting together pretty much everything we've learned so far in this chapter. We're going to be looking at finding the zeros, or in other words, just finding the answers. When we're doing this, we're going to have to use some information that we've learned along the way. Okay, so we're going to have to be using our factoring skills sometimes. We're going to use our quadratic formula skills at different times. We're going to have to look at the graphs and seeing how we know answers show up on the graphs. We're going to have to use some synthetic division. So all of it kind of comes together here. This is probably my favorite section to teach all year because I love how it just kind of pulls together all the key things that we've learned all year long. All right, so here we go. So the fundamental theorem of algebra. I know we've talked about how when things sound hard, like the fundamental theorem of algebra sounds crazy hard, it usually means it's the easier it is. So in this case, this is exactly what it is. The book definitions here highlighted in yellow. You know this. This is nothing new to you guys. I just have never actually called it the fundamental theorem of algebra. So if f of x is a polynomial of degree n, then the equation f of x equals 0 has exactly n solutions. So keep in mind that some solutions may repeat. So we had already talked about if a graph bounces, right? If you have the graph and it comes down and it bounces and then goes back up, we know that wherever it bounced, that answer actually shows up an even number of times. So usually it's twice, but it could be 4 times, 6 times, 8 times, whatever. And if a graph goes through the x-axis, then that answer shows up an odd number of times. Once, 3 times, 5 times, 7 times. All right, so just kind of keeping that in mind. So again, what does the fundamental theorem of algebra mean? Let's take a look at the example. How many solutions does each equation have? So for number 1, we know that the highest exponent means that this has 3 answers, right? That's something we've known that for a long time. That's the fundamental theorem of algebra. Whatever the highest exponent is, whatever the degree is of that polynomial, that's how many answers. So if we look at number 2, how many answers will that one have, or how many zeros? Well, it's going to have 4. It will have 4 answers. And that's it. That's the fundamental theorem of algebra. So it sounds fancy, sounds hard. We've actually known that for a long time. But knowing that, and why I have talked about that so much, through all of this chapter, and I even talked about it in chapter 4, the reason we do it when it comes to this section especially. So when I ask you to find zeros in the past, when I've asked you to solve, normally what we do, right, to find the zeros, you would factor each polynomial and then set the factors equal to 0 and solve, right? Like if I gave you x squared minus 4 equals 0, and I asked you to find the zeros, or find the answers, means the same thing, you would have factored this x plus 2, x minus 2, and you would have went ahead and solved, right? So you'd have been like, oh yeah, so that means x equals plus or minus 2. You can see that from solving both of those. All right, so that's check. We've done that. We understand that. In the last section, one factor was given to you, or the 0, right? And we can put it back as a factor, and we used it to factor it, right? We used division, and then we got it down to something then that would factor. So we were able to kind of put all that together. Now, this time, nothing's going to be given to you. It's going to be like, okay, here's the equation, find the zeros. And this is where we're going to be faced with something that doesn't factor by any means that we know of to look at it, so we have to kind of jump to something else. We're going to go back to what you were learning about in 5.4, where we were able to use one of them, do synthetic division or long division, and then we were able to kind of take it from there and factor it, and then we can solve. Okay, let's kind of jump right in. So find all the zeros of the function. So I know by looking at this, that's an x to the third, that's going to have 3 answers. I know that before I do anything at all. That's going to have 3 answers. All right, so knowing that, Normally, our first thing would be we would look at that equation, but oh, look, it's 4 terms, and we would try to factor it. Now, don't write this down, I just want to show you. But we would try to factor this. So we would group the first two, don't write this down. Group the last two. We'd pull a GCF out of an x squared, be left with x minus 3. We'd pull out a negative 2, and then have 5x minus 12. And then common factor, we don't have one. So that's why we can't just factor this like normal. It doesn't factor. The way it's written, the way it's set up, it does not factor by grouping. So this is why we need another option. How do you solve something if it doesn't factor by methods that you know? All right, so here we go. Step 1. Graph it and find the nice zeros. Now normally if we were in class, I'd make you grab your graphing calculators and then you would have to graph this on your own and look at it. For the sake of online learning, just to make things easy on us, I'm going to go ahead and give you the graphs. So the graph is down here below. Find the nice zeros. So where does it cross at a nice point? Well, I can see it crossed right here. That's at negative 3. And it went through, so I know the answer is just once, maybe 3 times, 5 times, but we know it's going to be at least once. All right, cross through, so that's x equals 2. And we have an answer here that is 1, 2, 3, that is 4. All right, it looks like I found all the answers. Well, let me kind of show you what this looks like. Step 2, use the zeros for synthetic division. So we would set this up with synthetic division. So remember we use our coefficients, so we would have 1, negative 3, negative 10, and 24. You could start with any of these. I'm going to go ahead and just start with the first one here, which is negative 3. And I don't have to change the sign because that's what x equals, right? That's not a factor. The factor would be x plus 3, but we always divide by what x equals. Drop the first one down. So we multiply negative 3 and 1 to get negative 3. We would add, that gives me negative 6. Multiply negative 3 and negative 6 is a positive 18. Add gives me 8. Multiply negative 3 and 8, which is a negative 24. And then that gives me 0. Now, every time you do this, you should get a 0 at the end. Because what's happening is if it's a factor, your remainder should be 0. So if you think, like right here I see x equals negative 3, and you do synthetic division and you don't get a 0 at the end, one of two things has happened. Either that actually did not cross where you think it does, or you did your math wrong somewhere. Okay, so you want to kind of go back, double check, look at it, and make sure, because if you don't get a 0 at the end, something's wrong. All right, so I'm going to kind of show this to you a couple different ways. So first of all, I could stop here. As long as we get to an x squared, then we can kind of stop and we could solve. So let's kind of look at that option first, and then I'll go back and look at it a couple different ways. So if I stop here, I recognize since this was x cubed and we divided once, this is now x squared minus 6x plus 8. Then I could finish solving. I could factor this. We'd have x and x. Last one's a plus, so they're both minus. And I can go 1 and 8 or 2 and 4. It's going to be 2 and 4. And then if I solve these, I would get x equals 2 and x equals 4. Take a look over here. There's x equals 2 and there's x equals 4. So I did find all my answers. Now, let's kind of backtrack a minute. Let's go back to where we had this setup where you had 1, negative 6, and 8 still there, right? I'm just kind of picking up from right there. So I already used the negative 3, so let's this time use the 2. Instead of stopping it once you get to this x squared and then factoring, you could then keep going. So if I keep going and I use the next answer in line here, drop down the 1, multiply and get 2, add for negative 4, multiply gives me negative 8, and I get 0 at the end. So I'm good. So again, I could stop here. Since I've done synthetic once, twice, I'm now down to an x to the first. So I have x minus 4 equals 0. Solving, I get x equals 4, which is exactly that one. Okay, so you can kind of keep going. My biggest thing, I would, if it was me and I'm working through a problem and I don't have all the answers, in this case, I have them all. I knew it was supposed to have 3. I found 3 answers right on that graph. So you can double check to make sure they worked by doing your synthetic division. Okay, if you're confident, that's great. But if you don't have all of them, I would use all the nice ones that you do have, so that way you take it down as far as you can. I ended up linear right here, right? Where I was able to have just x minus 4 equals 0. That's really easy to solve. I could have stopped here at quadratic, but then I had to factor it, and it took a little more work. Synthetic division is pretty quick and easy. I would use that on every answer that you possibly can. All right, let's try another. All right, so find all the zeros of the function. So f of x, remember that's just like y equals. We have an x to the third, so that means you will have how many answers? You should have 3 answers. All right, so if I look at the graph, do you see 3 answers? Well, here it crosses the x-axis, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's at -7. It crossed here at -2. And it crossed here at +2. So again, I have all 3 of my answers. But let's look what happens. Let's just kind of check these, because you want to make sure, because sometimes it could look like it crosses, but what if it was like negative 6.9999999? That's really close to -7. And this graph is very pixelated, so you can't always be positive. So we can check it real quick with synthetic division. So I'm going to set it up. Remember, we have coefficient. Ooh, that's a 1, sorry. So we have 1, 7, -4, and -28. Let's go with my first one here at -7. Drop that down, and we'll do our synthetic, where you multiply -7 and 1. It's -7. Add gives me 0. Here's where students mess up because they forget how to multiply. -7 times 0 is 0. You laugh, but you know what? Seriously, I see it all the time. People suddenly think that's -7. Zeros make this mystical thing people suddenly can't figure out. I don't know. Anyway, so -4 and 0 is -4. Multiply -7 times -4 is a +28, and I get 0 for remainder. So I know I'm good. Moving forward, now I can go ahead and use the -2. Again, this is just checking. I think I found all 3 of them. Checking will let me know for sure that they are, in fact, the right answers. -2 times 1 is -2. Add gives me -2. Multiply -2 and -2 is +4. Adding gives me the 0. Every time I get that 0 at the end, I know I'm good. 0 at the end means it worked. It was a beautiful factor, no remainder. All right, and then the last one I have is a +2. Use the +2, drop the 1 down. That gives me 2, and I get 0 at the end. So they all checked out. So I'm supposed to have 3 answers. I have 3 answers. X equals -7. X equals -7, -2, and +2. Now, you guys know they don't all work out that perfect and pretty, right? All right, let's take a look here. We have find all the zeros of the function. So looking here, I see x to the 4th. I know I should end up with 4 answers, right? Should have 4 answers. All right, so looking here, I can tell, right here, I know that's crossing at 3. Right here's a nice one at 1. And then this one's at -2. Now, if you think back and remember, what does it mean if the graph bounces? That did not cross at -2, it bounced off of it. That means that answer actually shows up at least twice. Could be 4 times, but I know it's not 4 times because there's only 4 answers. So, do I have all 4 answers just by looking at this? And the answer is yes, I do. Right? X to the 4th, I should have 4 answers. I have -2, -2, 1, and 3. Again, I can check. 1, -9, -4, and 12. All right, So knowing that, again, I can double check this. So we'll just try the -2 to start. Doesn't matter which one you start with. So -2 and 1, multiply, and then we add. It's -11. Multiply gives me a +22. And then we add. And that gives me, oh, I'm noticing something's going on here. What did I, oh my goodness, you guys, I did like the ultimate no-no. Did anybody catch that? Anybody? Nobody's yelling at me at this point? This is why I shouldn't go so fast through this. All right, let me erase this. Let's start again. Oh my gosh, you guys. See, Miss Solner's human too. All right, one thing I didn't notice because I was moving too quick. Look what happened up here. I went x to the 4th. Right to an x squared. There's a 0x cubed sitting in there. Right, it missed something. Oh my goodness. All right, so let's go back. We have 1 for the x to the 4th, 0 for x cubed, -9 for x squared, -4, and then 12, right? We needed the x to the 4th, x cubed, x squared, x to the 1st, constant. I was just checking. I was testing you, right? Isn't that what you guys always tell me? All right, so going back, let's start again. The first one there is -2. So multiply -2 and 1 is -2. If we add, that gives me -2. Multiply is +4. Add, -5. Multiply is 10. Add is 6. Multiply is -12. And then add 0. That looks so much better. See, right away, though, as I was working through that, since I didn't catch it at first, I'm like, something's not right because I don't have a 0 at the end. See, it's one of those things. Go back, double check. I missed something. All right, so I know that answer works. Did it actually bounce? Let's find out. If I use -2 again, because that answer showed up twice, it should work twice. All right, so we would get -2. That added would give me -4. Multiply gives me 8. Add gives me 3. Multiply is -6. 0. It checks. So yes, it did in fact bounce. Checking further, it crossed at 1. So multiply is 1. Add is -3. Multiply, -3. Add is 0. Check. That one worked. And checking the last one was a 3. Multiply, we get 3, and there's my 0, and I checked. All right, so x equals, we had -2, -2, 1, and 3. All right, we'll stop there for today. Just a real quick intro, some of the easy ones where I was able to just look at the graph, and I was able to find all the answers I needed. Okay, so tomorrow we'll pick back up with the last 4 problems on here, where you might have to do a little more work than that. All right, so check back in tomorrow for continuation of all of this. All right, thanks, guys.